in. My name is Stephanie Davis, and we're here with Nikil Saval, who is running for State Senate District 1. This is for Fifth Square, and Fifth Square is just a group of volunteers. We're running a political action committee, and we advocate for better policies around the built environment in Philadelphia, including housing, transit, road infrastructure, and things like that. And today we have Nikil and we're gonna ask several questions. If you do have questions, please put them in the chat. I will be able to see them along with co-hosts Will Tung and Dina Driscoll with Fifth Square. And we also just want to say thank you so much for taking the time today to be here. That's to everyone that's on the call. We know that times are really difficult right now. I know a lot of you are going through some very traumatic things, so we do appreciate you taking the time to come here. It's important that we elect strong leadership, and by becoming an informed voter, you're participating in that. So thank you so much, and thank you, Nikil, for coming in. You can go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll just jump right into questions.
Great. Okay, thanks, Steph. Thanks, Dina and Will, and to everyone from Fifth Square for hosting this. I'm very excited to be able to do it. I'll keep the introduction as short as I can. I mean, I did get to speak to the group about 2 months ago, and so I would love to get to questions. So I'm Nikil Saval. I'll use he, him pronouns. I'm running for state senate in the 1st Senate District. I live in South Philly, or what used to be considered South Philly, Queen Village, Bella Vista. I am a journalist. I write for, until I decided to run, I edited a magazine, and I wrote for the New Yorker and the New York Times. I was a columnist on urbanism and design and architecture for the New Yorker website, and write about those same topics for the Times, chiefly the 2 magazines. And I'm an organizer, community and labor organizer. I was an organizer with Unite Here, the Union of Hospitality Workers, where I worked in the school district, the stadiums, the hotels, the airport. Of course, as people might know, and most of those workers have been laid off in the middle of in this crisis, and so the workers, except for the workers that are now being finally acknowledged as essential. I co-founded a progressive organization called Reclaim Philadelphia, which has helped elect candidates to every level of state and city office. And I was recruited a number of people to run for committee people in the 2nd ward where I live, and was elected ward leader 2 years ago. It was the first Asian American ward leader in Philly history. And I'd be the first South Asian elected to state office in Pennsylvania history. I'm running on a platform that really centers a secular investment in affordable housing and renters' rights, in a Green New Deal for the state, which is not just a transition off of renewable energy, but decarbonizing all of our new construction, building housing near transit, expanding our transit system, and expanding urban agriculture and changing our agricultural system overall for a sustainable purpose. And then also a system of universal care. I'm a strong advocate of universal childcare. I've been calling for paid family leave. A system of expanding and subsidizing our system of long-term elder care. I think all those things are extremely under stress. So those are the kind of core parts of my platform and why I'm running. And I would be glad to answer your questions.
Great, thank you. So let me start with, how has Philly been doing in this moment of crisis, and what have you been working on recently to help individuals affected by this situation?
So, I think in terms of the actual solidarity among people in Philadelphia, I've been just deeply moved and impressed by what people have been able to do and what we've been able to accomplish without actually being able to be in person for the most part. I do feel that in terms of just the city's efforts to combat the crisis, we've fallen short considerably. I'll just name one aspect of this, which is the testing and public testing. So I wasn't able to put this data out today, but our campaign has produced a map that correlates testing and or the levels of testing and where essential workers live in the district. And I mean, correlate is not the right word because there actually is no correlation. And so much of the testing, the individuals who have been tested are chiefly not in areas where there's essential workers. So we really have very little idea of the number of cases and the number of people who are ill or have contracted coronavirus in the city. I think and so it gives us very little to go on data-wise in terms of what is happening in the city and at what point we could change our program of social distancing, or if necessary. I'm not sure that it is. And so I think that, with the lack of tracing, a lack of testing, I think we have very little knowledge of what's going on in our city. And so I feel like that's a real shortfall. In terms of our own work as an individual and as a campaign, so our campaign obviously shifted dramatically to the phones and to making phone calls and to reaching out to people online. We've adopted a program of mutual aid and connecting people to relief and mutual aid services. So we've made about 13,000 phone calls last weekend. I'd say we made about 50 overall. I think that's right. And 50,000. And in every phone call, we check in on people. We've been able to connect them to grocery deliveries, to tenants' rights representation as necessary, to, because people are suffering in so many different ways. So I think that's where we've been focusing a lot of our efforts as a campaign. And as an individual, I've done some hunger relief effort with CMAC in South Philadelphia twice. I'll probably be going back this Monday. I have I'm working to deliver meals to long-term elder care workers in St. Monica's in South Philly, where I also participated in a socially distanced protest. I've been working to help with reprieve power to advocate for greater use of reprieve power for incarcerated individuals who are at the greatest risk of contracting COVID-19. And also participated in a protest in support of that. And I've just been advocating consistently for renter relief in this moment. And I think, we should just remind ourselves that Philadelphia is a majority renter city. About a third of the households in Pennsylvania are renting. And it's one of the things that there is no, and now I think there is movement on a city and state level to accommodate that, but I think we need more attention to it. And there are creative ways that the governor can act in this moment to provide relief for renters, and we can talk about that shortly. But those are the things we've been focusing on. I outlined some of these in a joint COVID-19 platform that I released with Rick Rajewski, who's running for state representative in the 188th, which also is focused on workers' rights, on hazard pay for workers, on healthcare and things like that. So, and then on a green recovery after the crisis. So those are the things that I've been working on as an individual and that we've been doing as a campaign.
Great. So the next question is, if elected into the state Senate, which Senate committees will be your priority in getting your foot into? And just to provide a little context for that, the current Senator Farnese has been a strong ally for safe streets and joined the Transportation Committee to put forth protected bike lane legislation. Right. And do you think that you will be as strong in your advocacy for that as well?
Yes. Yeah. So I do applaud the senator for doing that. I would certainly be a strong advocate, and I would be a strong advocate on years when I don't have a primary challenge as well. I think that we need an advocate who actually has direct experience as well. I exclusively rely on transit and cycle and using my bike to get around. I am also, as a journalist who writes about these issues, especially passionate about them. So the committees that I'm interested in are urban affairs, appropriations, because I think there's some budgetary importance to all of this. I am interested in transportation and environment and energy. Those are the kind of four that matter considerably to me. And so, you know, one of the things that I think we need to do is to be thinking long-term about the health and safety of our transit and housing infrastructure. I've called for a major investment in affordable housing in this district. I'll just note that in terms of the money that has come in through the state to this district, we've had about $1 billion come through. It's a very central district, and the state senator has a lot of influence over where state grant money, RACP or RCAP money comes through. Much of that money has gone to support commercial real estate and luxury hotel construction in Center City. Only $14 million over 12 years has gone to affordable housing construction. That's about 1,500 units. That's just not very many units for a district of this size and with the need that it has. And so I would be a strong advocate for projects that are applying for RACP grants that would build more affordable housing. I think there are other things that we can do to preserve our housing stock, to exempt certain, to change some of the zoning legislation and perhaps provide density bonuses for people who exceed zoning rules, maybe do some by right construction for people. I mean, we have to kind of consider the housing stock for people wanting to expand existing housing so that we could actually just have more multifamily housing in our neighborhoods. I think all of that being built near transit is sort of one of the essential tasks of planning for the next decade or so. And it is part of an environmental strategy. This is partly why I would be interested in environment and energy. I mean, I think we need greater density. We need a greater density of affordable housing. And we need to be expanding transit to accommodate that. And I think there are a couple other questions about transit, so we can talk about that later. But just to go back to the question, absolutely. I mean, we need a strong advocate, and we need an advocate who has some vision and care and knowledge of the issues. And it has been central to our campaign and what we would be pushing for in office.
Great, thanks. And while you were answering that question, a question did pop up in the chat that's kind of related to what you were talking about. It's from Charlie, and it says, do you think the recovery could be a good moment for YIMBYs, which is Yes in My Backyard, folks, to push zoning changes to allow for more multifamily construction as a way to create jobs across the state?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, I would say that there are a number of ways that we can be using the moment to expand construction of housing and affordable housing in particular. I do believe that to build a winning coalition, because bills of this kind have often been defeated by NIMBYism. We have to kind of pair them with affordable housing construction. We have to pair it with renters' rights in particular. But I do think that's true. I mean, I do think that increasing residential construction is a good idea. I also want to point out that residential construction should be paired with a green initiative, with retrofitting existing housing, with decarbonizing new buildings. We've called for, in our campaign, for the adoption of a regional energy center, which akin to what Massachusetts has, which sets stronger standards than LEED certification or whatever kind of greenwashing people tend to do with existing buildings, to decarbonize our new construction. And I think we can be doing that with some of our older buildings as well, getting new buildings off of natural gas. This is actually just a huge amount of work. We also have proposed a Green New Deal for our schools. I think that would also be a source of jobs, turning schools, recreation centers, and libraries into sources of community resilience. And then finally, I mean, we should be, and this is maybe getting ahead of things, in terms of our transit system and getting people to return to public transit, one of the things we could be doing is following the model of other cities, such as Seoul or Taipei, where they're actually just doing much more cleaning of existing transit infrastructure. New York, I know, has adopted a program which is grossly insufficient. I mean, I think it's like one cleaning a day. I think we just need to be doing it more, and we should need to be doing this long term, which is also a source of employment. So, all of this is actually could be public sector employment, and so I think these would be quite good jobs. I mean, not necessarily the construction, but I think there's a lot of opportunities in the recovery to advance goals of greater housing density, of greater affordable housing construction, and moving to a more sustainable economy.
Great. So we're going to shift gears now to transit. And the next question is, so it's like kind of a two-parter. With the dire financial situation facing SEPTA, from plummeting ridership due to COVID, lack of fare collection on buses and trolleys, and the future prospect of losing $178 million from the lost turnpike toll revenue, what are some of your solutions for ensuring that SEPTA will survive the crisis? And as a part of that, would you consider congestion pricing or TNC, which is Transportation Network Company surcharges? And just to give even more context to that, TNC is like, think about Uber and Lyft people for folks listening in.
Yes, so to kind of take this question in parts, I mean, we were going to face a funding crisis for SEPTA regardless of this crisis. Obviously, it's much more acute right now. I think there are a number of things that we can do. One is just to ensure that a lot of stimulus money goes to transit. There has been some funding of transit through the stimulus, but it actually has been. It has, for smaller cities, it's sort of it's actually, with cities that have less transit need, they've actually gotten more money. New York, for example, it's actually gotten very little by comparison to the extent of its transit system. But I mean, one of the things is just making sure that we're not directing stimulus money into, say, highway expansion. I've actually called for a moratorium prior to this crisis, a moratorium on highway expansion. And long term, I feel like we need a different regional system for funding SEPTA. And I know this is a little bit speculative, but there is a way to create a regional tax fund, which maybe would require a tax on income from wealth in the region, and basically bringing the region into investing in SEPTA. And one possibility is increasing a tax on income from wealth and maybe decreasing the non-resident wage tax. That's one option to kind of get buy-in to a regional fund that would fund transit. I think you could also, this is an idea that I should just mention, has come out of conversations with the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center. I think that could be a way to sustain SEPTA long term. I do believe that congestion pricing is a good idea. I definitely support a surcharge on ride hailing on TNCs. I think we need more than that, and we can talk about that later. I mean, it's something I've studied in great detail. It's just the effect of TNCs on transit, on congestion. I do think we also need a cap on the number of cars. I'll just mention that Senator Farnese is one of the people that voted to support the expansion of TNCs in our city. So we need a change in that. I mean, it was poor planning to begin with, because just releasing an essentially unlimited number of cars onto the streets is not a sustainable model for any city. So I do support a surcharge on TNCs. I do think we need more attention to how we regulate TNCs in general through the Utility Commission. So whether that adds up to pencils out to help SEPTA enough is unclear. I mean, there are other ideas like tolling I-80, which is not an immediate solution, but a long-term one. And so, I think we need to kind of consider every possible option for funding it and funding it long-term. I think ultimately we need advocates also who are advocating for more federal funding, who are strong advocates for transit and who are willing to to rally other states and create. There are ways to create regional initiatives around transit. I think there are obviously regional initiatives around climate change. I think we should have more interstate support for transit in our region.
Great. So we're gonna stick on SEPTA for the time being, just because there are capital hearings and operational budget hearings coming up. So in a few weeks, that'll be happening. And Fifth Square has proposed a FAIR plan for SEPTA that we believe is attainable, responsible, and would benefit low-income riders. We recognize like some of this stuff is just like the first step. It's by no means like a solution to everything, but it does include free transfers, fare capping, free rides for children, and the Zone 1 regional rail would be free for anyone holding a trans pass. Do you support that FAIR plan, and do you have, like, what are your long-term goals in regards to the fare structure that SEPTA is currently working with?
Yeah, I saw Fifth Square's FAIR plan. I do think it's a good start. I do support it. I do think long term that, I mean, I think, you know, ultimately, like, we need to, the needs of transit are reliable service and efficient service and equity. And so I think we need to accommodate all of those goals. And I would just mention that one thing that I think the plan maybe gestures towards is just fair integration across the system, so that it would, I think that would just both be a form of efficiency and equity, so that you would pay a fare once in order to move between aspects of the system, bus, commuter rail, and things like that. So I think, so eliminating transfers is part of that. So I think, you know, I think that would be paired, and this is not my idea, but I think it's a good one, with having the commuter rail kind of be more rapid speed by allowing it to continue through the city. Alon Levy outlined this, and at some point in Plan Philly, it was a good idea. I think it's not the only such plan, but to make that work, you would probably need fair integration. So that's one of my long-term plans. I know that I think I do support an ultimate. I mean, I know there's some controversy over this, but I think with sufficient federal funding, and this is a really long-term plan because we would need much more federal funding, I would support a free system. I am kind of curious to see it work in other cities, or how it works. And, you know, obviously if it doesn't, that's just like good evidence, but because you want the system to have a stable basis, so that if there is a crisis of this kind, that, you know, the elimination of fares doesn't just tank the system entirely. But if there's a federal backstop, maybe that could work. And I do think that would increase the efficiency of the system. If you didn't have a stupid card that you had to get, and like to get on any particular system, you just actually got on, it might increase the efficiency of the system. But that's, again, I recognize that's fairly speculative, but I do support it in terms of equity.
Great. Yeah, it sounds like you'd be an advocate for all-door boarding.
Definitely, yeah. That would. I mean, yeah, I've lived in plenty of cities with all-door boarding, and it's just, yeah, it's awesome. It really sucks not to have it.
So our next question has more to do with public space and density. People are saying that the pandemic is just and the calls for social distancing are just kind of going to kill the way that we used to congregate, and particularly in cities. So some are using this moment to rally against density and the construction of urban housing altogether. Do you believe there is a path forward in terms of encouraging more housing construction?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the correlation is just false. I mean, that people are drawing between density and the spread of the virus. It's just, I mean, you just have to look at some of the densest cities in the world, which are far more dense than say Philadelphia, Seoul, and Taipei. I mean, and which have much more extensive transit systems, for example. have been able to, this is a public health issue. I mean, it's an equity issue. It's an issue of economic justice. I mean, but fundamentally and it's exposed all the fractures in our societies everyone recognizes. But, as I understand it, the correlation is really between the number of people in a given unit. And so actually you just need to increase, I mean, it's not perhaps this simple, but you should increase the number of units and have the number of units available to people so that we're not living in crowded conditions within a particular housing unit. So just increase the number of housing units. Again, I think this should be paired. This is, as I've outlined in some of our housing plans, with long-term relief for renters and protection for renters, such as a just cause for eviction and right to counsel, forms of stabilization for renters, and things like that. I think there's more to be done. I think we should also be calling for more affordable housing construction in particular. But yeah, so I mean, in that case, I mean, the argument that you can make is that actually the correlation is actually that we just don't have enough housing, and so we should be that's clear. That may be a clear instance of what the problem is, and so we should be building more of it. So I do think there's an opportunity. It's the right argument, and I think and it remains true.
Great. Okay, so we're going to bring it back just because I want to make sure we've covered all the ground on transportation network company use and just like in general, like the kind of congestion that might happen as we reopen. So people are rightfully wary of that crowding on trains and buses in particular, and we just want to make sure that doesn't like just shift everybody straight to cars or straight to those rideshare programs. So what will be some actions that you can take to reduce car trips, whether it's encouraging working from home, encouraging biking, assuage of fears of transit? What are your thoughts on that? I think you are muted. Hold on one second. I'll try to fix that.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just muting myself because I was pulling up an article I wrote. This is not to plug my other career, but I have studied this pretty significantly, and so it's just written about it. I would write about it more. I don't know if you can share this, Steph, I just sent this article to you, to the group, but this is just one of them, but it's just specifically about TNCs and transit. So I do think we need long-term regulation of TNCs. I mean, I think it's just not a good idea to have companies that basically, I mean, there's a labor question and a transit question. The labor question is that many of these workers are misclassified, I believe, as independent contractors. California's tried to attack this problem with a pretty visionary bill, AB 5, which is complicated, but I think is in the right direction. But basically what these companies are allowed to do is to have a sort of unlimited number of cars on the streets. It's a reserve army of cars that can be dragooned into existence or dispersed. And so based on projections of demand or actual demand. And so that's not a good idea. I just think it clogs bus lanes. It clogs. It's not just that individuals have the demand for this. It's actually that it's been made artificially cheaper. It's been integrated into all of our apps. I mean, in terms of you can actually look and look at the time differences for requesting a rideshare company and taking transit. And so it's kind of artificially created this consumer demand. We need to regulate this. And so I mentioned a support for congestion pricing. I mentioned regulating TNCs and capping the number of cars, creating a surcharge on them. I also do believe that we should create, bus only lanes. I think we all have this experience now from this crisis. There are a number of things that have been illuminating. I mean, a fully pedestrianized areas of Martin Luther King Drive being turned into having no traffic on it. If people have gone bike riding, or, just these areas where you're suddenly like, you're freed up. This was true also when the Pope came to town and we had car-free streets. I mean, I think we just suddenly, you recognize the pleasure of this. And so planning around that and creating fully pedestrianized streets, bike-only streets, bus-only lanes, some kind of BRT like system, all of this is definitely on the table. I think that we should be recognizing the aspects of this crisis, terrible as it is, terrible as the human cost is, to advance a more sustainable future for transit and for our cities and for our city lives. I mean, I've said this in other contexts about supporting a Green New Deal or Green New Deal suite of packages. I think people tend to think that sustainability is actually a retreat from our quality of life as it exists. But I think we recognize now, and maybe before, we certainly recognize now that our quality of life is quite poor, actually. And investing in transit, investing in affordable housing, having renter protections, and greening our existing housing, and just infrastructure in general would make our lives dramatically better. And so transitioning off of fossil fuels would make our lives better. We would have cleaner air. We would guarantee, just for the very least, our future. We just have to remember that portions of this district in the next 50 or 100 years are going to be underwater if we don't act, even if we do act, frankly. But if we can mitigate the amount that we will be suffering from the effects of climate change. So I want to think about these things in that context as well. But yeah, so that's a lot. I've kind of said a lot about what we want to do, but I think we should be thinking long term, and we need vision. And I just want to remember that this Senate seat is Center City in South Philly, east of Broad Street, Fairmount, the River Wards, Southwest Philly, all the way to the airport. It should be the leading district in Pennsylvania. And we should have a leader who cares about the issue, because you have the license, you have the leeway. We have groups like Fifth Square that are pushing, that are thinking long term about the issues that face us in terms of safe streets, in terms of transit, in terms of housing. We need someone who cares about that, and we need someone who cares deeply about it, and would take the cues from the energy in this district. So that's why I kind of emphasize the suite of issues that we could be tackling in response to this crisis. But at the very least, more fully pedestrianized streets, bus only lanes, bike only lanes, and enhancing the quality of public space and the ability of people to get where they need without fear of dying by getting hit by a car. So
yeah, pedestrian deaths are up right now, which is astounding, considering the lack of people out in the world. So I am going to switch gears to questions that were kind of submitted a little later on. And one of the big questions that came up kind of among our members was that, while there is an overlap between, I'm hesitant to use these titles just because I know a lot of people wouldn't put themselves in these buckets, but like urbanists and socialists, there are definitely places where they do butt heads, and even in our membership we have disagreements all the time, and we discuss and talk it out at length. But as someone with a foot in kind of both worlds, can you talk about some of those divisions and some practical examples of where you think there might be that disagreement?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so as someone who identifies as both in various ways, I find the term, urbanism is an interesting term because it actually has, it has a relative, it's sort of changed I actually looked into this at some point. It has sort of changed meanings over time to accommodate its current meaning, which is a slightly narrower version of what it originally meant, which is just like a kind of appreciation of cities in general. But you know, I think you saw it very clearly in the fight over SB, and now it was SB 50, the various Senate bills in California, which the so-called YIMBY bills that Senator Wiener was advancing, which I think were very interesting, and at various moments they've encountered opposition. I think it basically at every turn, the three iterations of it, from I mean, overwhelmingly, and I think most importantly from and sort of critically from you know, NIMBY groups, from wealthier homeowners in Beverly Hills and what have you, and so, and as someone, I grew up in California, it's just worth noting, and so I have a strong familiarity with this political type. Not that they don't exist everywhere, but California is one of the pioneers in terms of the home voter, and so in property tax revolts and things like that. So it's very familiar to me. But you know, I think there was the coalition was always, there was always an attempt to broaden the coalition with those bills, and tenants' rights groups were often opposed because there wasn't enough protection for renters, or it was felt that there wasn't enough, or that that a plan of this kind would send a market signal that would dramatically increase the amount of market rate housing and drive up prices in a given area, and especially send those signals in sort of fast gentrifying neighborhoods. And I think this is a source of debate. I think it's actually it's a difficult question to answer. I land on the side of wanting to create a kind of omnibus bill around this, chiefly because I do believe it depends where you are and it depends on the state, but I think we do need more housing construction in general. I think a lot of neighborhood groups, wealthier suburbs, things like that do block housing construction, and multifamily housing construction in particular, for historic reasons that are you know, often racist, but and generally classist, against what is considered the type of person to dwell in an apartment building. I also do think that you have had instances where larger amounts of housing construction have resulted in a decrease in prices, at least you know, for some time. But I think these should be paired with renter protections. I think, so that brings me to this kind of socialist side of the equation. I think a lot of people are calling for, on a lot of socialists, including myself, are calling for some form of renter stabilization. I think rent control, rent stabilization, rent caps on rent increases, and you know, and I think understandably people feel that this issue has not always had success, but I think there are ways to do a rent stabilization program that don't limit the amount of new construction, for example, which is one of the fears. So you could possibly exempt new construction, which is often how it's done. You could kind of consider what the cap on increases is. But it is, I think, a strategy for allowing neighborhoods to thrive and to grow, and allowing people to stay in place. So, you know, I think these are reasonable debates to be had. I think they've often been had in especially strident ways. So I think, you know, on one side of the equation, maybe rent control is not a thing that is often prized by urbanists because it limits new construction, focusing exclusively on new construction. I'm caricaturing both of these arguments to some degree, but you know, focusing on new construction and new market rate housing is seen by socialists as being anathema to the larger goals of stopping gentrification. And so, you know, I mean, I think we're all, you know, I think these are going to continue to be debates. I do think there are ways to kind of square the circle. These solutions aren't perfect. But I am someone who believes we need more housing. I believe we need more affordable housing. I do believe we need more protections for renters. There are other sides to this. I think we also need to be increasing the amount, raising the wage floor, increasing the rates of unionization in the service sector. I think we need to be pairing this with a green jobs initiative. I mean, that's fundamentally where a lot of new employment is going to be coming from. We need to be raising the wages in the care sector. So it has to be a holistic plan. I think it's not just limited to housing. But that's a way of I think, describing the suite of problems that is captured by these two terms and where they're sometimes opposed. I think we don't have to oppose them.
Great, thanks. So the next question is also one that popped up a little later on, and it's still about land use, but it's kind of centered around supervised injection sites and kind of the broader consequences of land use policy. So just for some background, Fifth Square did get behind, we called it like YIMBY for CIS, and supported supervised injection sites, particularly a project in South Philly. But it did, and you also came out for it. We saw your stance on your website. But when it comes to community engagement, it did present an example of how there really are some very strong challenges. And so the question is, how will you handle community backlash in the face of initiatives that you support, not just including SIS, but affordable housing and other questions about roads and streets and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a difficult thing to prejudge because I think it's different in every instance. But just focusing on overdose prevention sites and the particular instance, I did support the opening of Safe House at the location that was planned for it at Broad and McKean. It gives me no pleasure to say this, but I think I was the only person supporting it. I mean, only candidate in various ways. Certainly I was the only that's probably not true, but but I think I was one of the few. Let's just say that. I really can't think of an elected official except for the mayor, and even then to a degree that I think he didn't fully lead on the issue, supporting it. So, I mean, in that was an instance where I feel like community input, everyone who spoke of it, I think it was a kind of, it was a feint, or it was a way to get out of the issue, because there actually had been years of so-called community input, of just discussion about the issue. Among harm reduction advocates, it should be noted that there was a feeling that somehow this had been messed up, and I don't think community input is what happened. I think it's actually leadership and political leadership that was missing, because you owe it as a political leader to be driving the conversation in certain instances. And so I also think that every time community input was mentioned, it was never people who used drugs who were considered part of the community. So there was always an us versus them that excluded the people who were in some ways most in need of the service. And this is always the case in these kind of fights where a community is invoked or created, and it always excludes a community that is meant to be coming into a neighborhood or is already there in the case of the overdose prevention site. But so I think we just need a redefinition of the idea of community. I think we need to be, I don't think it actually is necessarily the having of more community and regional meetings. I think actually there are quite a lot of those. I think we just need stronger political leadership and stronger political education on the issues. And the number of politicians, including my opponent, who posed as just regular guys from the neighborhood out to protect a certain idea of community, I think is extremely damaging. And not just damaging for this issue, which is now resulting in more people dying. I mean, we should just be clear about that, and more people not having access to services. But in any issue, I mean, why is it that we've only had 1,500 units of affordable housing in the last 12 years? It's not just because there's a certain kind of priority in terms of who is considered the community, or that the senator represents, and who is the community that is most in need. And so, it's one thing, again, to be standing up for a particular expansion of protected bike lanes in the year that you face a primary, but we need to be doing way more than that consistently. And so, and it will run up against the same sort of ideas of community and community input repeatedly. And at some point, you need to be in the position of leading on the issue, and not invoking a kind of spectral community to cover up your own cowardice.
Excellent. So those were our largest questions. And before I try to get into a couple additions that came in through the chat, I do want to plug that the Fifth Square Election Center is available. The answers to Nikil's, like the first questionnaire that we sent out, are available there. That link is in the top of the chat. There also is a link to register to vote. You have until May 18th to make sure that you are registered to vote in the area. Make sure you check your registration. There have been the occasional purges. You never know whether or not you're on there until you just check, share it out with friends and family. And also, we are encouraging everyone to please vote by mail this year. It takes the pressure off of your neighbors. It takes the pressure off of your community. It takes pressure off of Philadelphia and just everyone as a whole. You are able to apply for the mail-in ballot until May 26th, but we encourage you to do it early because it also needs to be back into the office by June 2nd. And that's not a postmark date, that is like to the office by 8 p.m. on June 2nd. So get that application in as quickly as possible. I put a link in the chat for that as well. If you do not have an up-to-date state ID, you do need to email for an application. You cannot do it online. You can also call for that application. I'm in that boat. I don't have a driver's license and my state ID expired, unfortunately. So just make sure you're taking those steps to get everything sorted out, and tell your friends too as well, just to take pressure off those poll workers, because they are consolidating polling places this year. And then, okay, so I think a lot of this was addressed, but I do want to bring it up while we have you for 10 more minutes. I'm not sure the name of this person because it's just coming up in there as a phone number, but it says that we were not prepared in 2009 with shovel-ready projects. I'm assuming that's like a reference to our last recession. What project in southeastern PA can we prioritize? This is like, I guess, more of a SEPTA question, and I guess would you support if we could get the funding, like an extension to the Navy Yard, or like what kind of projects would you prioritize?
An extension of the Broad Street line to the Navy Yard?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, like these questions haven't been vetted by Fifth Square in general. We obviously have our own capital budget improvement ideas, such as trolley modernization and things like that. But it's a question that's been proposed in the chat.
Yeah, I have like specific feelings about the Broad Street. I don't want to get bogged down in it. I just feel like the Navy Yard is like a kind of weird, it's just an office park. I don't know. Anyway, I feel like there should be more housing. Anyway, I'm not going to get lost in it, but I feel like I'll just kind of in a broad way. I mean, I think that this is why we need we need to consider, this is the point in some ways of a state level Green New Deal. And it came to be, it came much more quickly than I would have expected, in the sense that we had a crisis induced by the pandemic. And so we are in a position where we have stimulus money coming through of various kinds, and some of it is earmarked and some of it is block granted. And I think in 2009, what we did have this conception that it was going to be fine to just pour a lot of that into infrastructure projects that weren't strictly necessary, highway construction. I think that we do actually need to have a plan to move Pennsylvania off of fossil fuels. And so I think that that just involves a number of different projects. I mean, I think one of them is chiefly for example, could be a huge program to expand solarization and expand our urban agriculture, to expand our sort of our water treatment and just use of water, smarter sort of water use in the city. I think we have a kind of not a great system for that. So green roofs and things like that. I think these are all things that could actually be sustainable long term. So this would actually amount to a lot of different projects. I mean, one very obvious project, and it's already happening, is PHFA is currently financing very small numbers of affordable passive house construction. I know one of the architect, Jeremy Avellino, who's building some of these. And this is the future. We should be building more of it. It's happening. It should be expanded. And I'm surprised that it's not even being talked about to the degree that it is. It's extraordinary. And that could be an example of something where we have much more residential construction of passive housing, in addition to kind of retrofitting our existing housing stock. So I would really strongly support something like that as a way to expand the amount of affordable housing. We need that housing to be green. So I think that would be a worthy project. In terms of specific transit projects, I mean, besides shoring up the SEPTA against the kind of financial crisis, I would defer to some of the I would want to think through some of the particular needs that the system faces before committing to any particular instance of it. But I'll just mention again, as a kind of broad idea, building more passive houses, and again, there is an existing program that through PHFA, the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Authority.
Great. So another one this kind of gives you like another plug for another one of your projects, but I know you wrote a book on this, but open offices. And I feel like it's just, you kind of hinted at it almost, and it got us thinking about it. But with COVID, they don't really make sense anymore anyway. So if you want to talk about that and why we should, what we should do about that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say about this. Obviously, I've received, I would just say, like 10 or 20 media requests in the last week or so about this. The thing of, there are two parts to this. One is just the working from home aspect, and the original, I mean, working from home is a complex issue. I mean, often the domestic sphere and the work sphere refused for many years, and of course for largely occupations that have been largely done by women, that work has been done at home. So there's like a history that I don't want to obviate, but really what we think of is like remote working for white collar workers really started in the 1970s when, in response to congestion issues and traffic issues in California, in Los Angeles. And so there was a particular instance of trying to establish a work from home model, such to the point where there were futurists who thought that we would just no longer have cities, and we would have just electronic villages that were all connected networks. And that was from the 1980s. And that didn't happen. I mean, really what this has done is it's clarified this, and this often happens when you work from home, but in an exaggerated instance like this, where everyone is forced to work from home who can, excluding essential workers, let's be clear. It clarifies what the office is for, and what workplaces are for, and what they're not for, and what you can do at home and what you can't. So it puts more pressure on the office to deliver certain things. And so I do believe that open plan offices were a mistake. They never delivered the things that they were supposed to deliver. It was always about cheapness. There was always a spurious egalitarian idea that like we're all equal in the open office space, but that was just always bullshit. And so it was because people were paid differentially, and who got to spend time in the office and who didn't was always dependent on your role. It was tried in the 1960s in Germany, and it failed then. It continually fails. it's really just about cheapness. And so obviously it doesn't work now because we have a sense of what is communicable in these spaces. But I mean, really what people prefer is private space, and they've always preferred it. That's always been the preference for people who have polled these spaces. And really what you need is a kind of broad initiative on the part of workers and more input on the part of workers to be able to structure their workday in a way that works for them and that works for our cities, and works for, you know, all the things that we need to accomplish as a society. And so it's a very difficult problem, I guess I would say. Like it's if you know if we just, now that more people have the experience of working from home, I think it's going to put pressure on our commercial real estate, pressure on our offices to deliver certain things. I certainly don't think open office plans are a solution. You know, but it's not also solved by having people in cubicles. I just want to be clear about that. That's like, those are also forms of open offices. We need this is also a work question, and what kind of work people do, which actually requires concentration, which is better done in a private setting. So I've gone on a little bit about this because it's obviously a subject of some interest to me, even though it's not what I'm working on currently. But it is an interesting question insofar as so much of what we consider to be city development in the United States has been structured around commercial real estate and office development. The very idea of a downtown was pioneered in the United States. The notion of an office separate from home in white collar and blue collar districts, all of this happened in the United States. So we have to suddenly think through that if we're going to reduce the amount of office space that we construct, or what it is for, or what, you know, but I think we do maybe want to reconsider how much space is allotted to each person and when people work. It's also an energy efficiency issue. I mean, do you want buildings on with lights on all the time everywhere? Is that what we want to be doing as a society? That's an open question. So I think we have to pose these questions acutely. And I think we're in a better position as a society, even though I would not have it be this way, but we do have in a more acute sense than we did of what these workplaces are for, how we want to get to them, and how we want to structure a city to accommodate our work lives.
Thank you so much. We have 1 minute left, so we're going to end on that as a question. And also, I just want to point out that you're advocating for density and privacy at the same time, which I thought was pretty cool. Talking about just like more space in a different way. But I also just want to plug that if you enjoyed talking to Nikil today, we do have our next candidate Q&A a week from now. It's again at noon on Tuesday. That's with Vanessa McGrath, who we did endorse for the 175th district. I just want to point out that we have not endorsed in the state Senate district race. It was too tight of a vote, which is why we are so glad that you were able to join us again, Nikil. We did invite Larry Farnese to this. We're still trying to reach out and get back so that we can hear more from both folks on all of these important questions and more. So we really are grateful for your time today, Nikil, and for everyone for coming out. I did post a link to our calendar in the chat to RSVP. Explore Fifth Square. If you like us, please consider becoming a sustaining member. This is all volunteer work, so a lot of this money just goes towards supporting candidates and leaders that we want to see in office and making these changes and making the city of Philadelphia better and brighter. So thank you all and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, staff. Thanks for the great moderation. Thanks for the great questions. I just want to say it's been like a real pleasure. It's rare that I get to talk in such detail about these questions. And I just enjoyed it really tremendously. And so I appreciate the forum, and I appreciate everyone for coming out, for devoting a lunch hour to this. So thank you.
Great. Thanks. All right. Bye, everybody.